since there is news since you and I talked, it's
Oh,
been a finalist or won 7 awards. So
wow, that's right. Oh, cool.
yeah, so that's been pretty wonderful. I had won awards for my nonfiction,
Uh-huh.
but fiction is always what I wanted to write.
Right.
So that's particularly special.
Welcome to Story Power, a bi monthly podcast where my guests and I chat about stories and creativity in all different styles and formats. My name is Lucinda Sage-Midgorden, and my goal is to promote what Dale Carnegie stated in his famous book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. He said, instead of condemning people, let's try to understand them. Let's try to figure out why they do what they do. That's a lot more profitable and intriguing than criticism, and it breeds sympathy, tolerance, and kindness. To know all is to forgive all. It's my firm belief that the goal of most creative people is to try to understand themselves and others. That's what makes artwork of all kinds so compelling. But more than that, the personal stories of my guests promote understanding as well. Roger C. Schenck, a cognitive scientist, said, human beings are not ideally set up to understand logic. They are ideally set up to understand stories. It's my hope that Story Power will help us understand each other better by sharing the stories of my guests. Hello, today is episode 102. I'm talking to Fran Hawthorne. She calls herself the other Hawthorne, or do you call the other Hawthorne? The other Hawthorne.
You know, we're not all related, so I can't even say great, 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 whatever, grandpa.
Right. Yeah.
Someday it would be nice if Nathaniel were the other Hawthorne, but I don't suppose that will ever happen.
So, Fran, you and I have talked before. You were on episode 83 and on my Patreon, and episode 83 aired on September 13th, 2023. This episode's not airing until June 2024, but I'm so glad to talk to you again. So, welcome to the show.
Yes, and thank you for inviting me back. It is nice.
Yes, really. Now, last time we talked about your book. Do you have a second book? And do you want to talk about your book that is a year old now? Do you want to talk about that book
Yeah.
too?
Well, first of all, the book that's a year old is my second novel, and it's
Oh,
my oh, I don't know, 10th or something book. Um but yeah, you know what? I am writing 2 others.
oh, good.
Um yeah, and I don't want to jinx anything. I'm very hopeful for the one that's further along. There's definitely interest in by June I sure hope I could do an update for you, but I don't want to
Yes.
jinx anything.
Yeah. Yeah. If you do publish that before June 5th is when it's going to air. Yeah, we can have a short little something I can add it on to this episode.
Okay, I'm going
Yeah.
to make a note of that.
Yeah,
Okay.
please do. Please do. Because I'll forget.
Oh, yeah, yeah, no, of course you will.
I'll forget.
I write everything down.
No, I do too. I
Yeah.
write it down too.
And it
So tell about your novel that you and I talked about on
I meant to
Patreon.
tell you, that's the
I
novel, yeah.
meant to tell you, right. Let's talk about that. And then
Uh-huh.
you can tell us a little bit about your other books that you're working on.
Okay, sure. Yeah, so I meant to tell you, first of all, since there is news since you and I talked, it's
Oh,
been a finalist or won 7 awards. So
wow, that's right. Oh, cool.
yeah, so that's been pretty wonderful. I had won awards for my nonfiction,
Uh-huh.
but fiction is always what I wanted to write.
Right.
So that's particularly special that, now
Yeah.
a novel has won some. And anyway, so this is a book. Um, it starts with a kidnapping. And it's about what secrets can we ethically keep?
Right.
Uh, how far would you go to help a friend? And um, what responsibility do we have to try and make the world a better place?
Right. Oh,
That's
good.
yeah, that's something very important to me. So as it begins, well, the prologue is the kidnapping, but so we'll start in chapter 1. Um, Miranda and Russ are engaged, and they're both these, idealistic young, professionals. Her parents were anti-war activists in the 60s. Her grandfather was a union organizer. They are both inspired by this, and they're trying to find, some job, some way that they feel that they also can make a difference. And Russ is going to be an assistant U.S. attorney. And in the process of being vetted for his job, the FBI discovers that his fiancée, Miranda, had been arrested for felony kidnapping 7 years earlier, which is a slight detail she'd never told him, even though she knew he was going through an FBI security vetting.
Mm-hmm.
And he is understandably furious. And she says, "But I was only helping a friend." And so that's the set off for the
Mm-hmm.
book.
The
And
inciting
in the course
incident.
of trying to save her marriage, trying to explain her kidnapping, and plus other things that are happening in her life, like her mother and stepfather are splitting up, Miranda starts to unravel other secrets that she didn't even know existed in the
Oh,
family of Russ, in her own family, in the family of the friend whose daughter she was kidnapping.
yeah. Uh-huh.
So
Was it an intentional? Because when we talked before, I got the feeling that it wasn't really an intentional kidnapping. She didn't realize that because she was divorced and she couldn't take her child outside the state or outside the country
right. I mean, it's as kidnappings go, it was benign, right?
right. Yeah.
It was true, and this is clear in the prologue that the friend is just getting out of a horrible, horrible marriage, and she's just trying to take her daughter to visit her parents in Israel. She's
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
Israeli born,
mm-hmm.
lives in the U.S. now, and nobody real. I mean, Miranda is saying, "Are you sure it's okay?" And her friend Romita is saying, "Yes, yes." But neither of them really know what they're doing.
Right.
And they are arrested at the airport because it is in fact illegal,
Right.
unless if you're in the process of divorce, there has to be written consent by the other parent, things
Right.
like that.
Yeah. I mean, she wasn't going to keep her there in Israel. She was going to come back. Right.
I'd be curious to know. That's your assumption. It'd be so interesting to know what other people think. It's never specified. Uh,
Oh, it's not specified.
well,
Oh,
she says in the prologue, "Oh, I'm just going to visit for a little while."
oh,
Um,
yeah.
but so you're right in that sense. But I would be interested to know, as I said, if other people assume that's the case, or if they think if she
Yes.
managed to do it, would she have stayed? So you've hit on one of the many, many little secrets, triggers,
Mm-hmm.
clues in the book that a person can read the whole book and I hope enjoy it, and
Yeah, right.
not notice some of the things that even readers have pointed out things to me that I didn't even intentionally put in. It's absolutely wonderful when when the characters are putting in their own little traps and whatnot.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, right, yeah. Oh my goodness, yes. So that is a it's like a conundrum, and how are they going to work it out? I like those kinds of stories
Mhm.
where you've got this, uh it could be a mystery, but it doesn't necessarily have this one's not really a mystery. This one's just, how are they gonna work out this issue, this conundrum that they find themselves in?
Well, it's interesting because, in a way, by that definition, almost every novel is a mystery. There's
Mhm.
always, well, there are some novels that don't seem to have plot arcs, but
Mhm.
typical novel has a plot, has a story, has an
Mhm.
issue that needs to be resolved
Mhm.
from almost from the start. And so it is kind of a mystery. How
Mhm.
will it be resolved? And sometimes you may think that I mean, I've had readers say to me, "Well, I assumed that Miranda and Russ would find a way to get together." And I'm not going to say whether or not that's the case, but I said, "So if that's so, what kept you going if you thought you knew the end already?"
Mhm.
And they say the process, how are they going to make it happen? Because as more and
Mhm.
more problems arise. And I
Mhm.
think that's a classic way of reading a typical
Mhm.
book.
Mhm.
Sometimes you can't even guess how it's going to be resolved. Sometimes
Right.
you think it's obvious and it fools you. There's
Mhm.
many different ways to set up the mystery. But thank goodness, I mean, I could never write a classic, like Agatha Christie, because I couldn't, I don't think I could plot it well enough that the murderer would be a surprise to the readers and yet obvious
Right.
as soon as it was revealed. I
Yeah.
mean, that's a talent. That's a real talent. So
Yeah, giving the clues because I just finished reading this trilogy. The first one's called Red Sparrow and it's by Jason Matthews, who was a CIA agent for
mm.
33 years. And so it's these three books. And he keeps giving you clues, but when you get to the end, it's like, oh, he was giving me clues, but I didn't want that ending.
Oh, yeah, I mean, but you raise a good point, and I try to do this. You have to leave clues. I think you do. I
Mhm.
shouldn't tell other people what you have to do, but
Right.
I think it's important for a novelist to leave clues that don't jump out,
Right.
but that might trigger the reader to notice something, but the reader is so caught up in the plot, the reader puts that aside.
Right.
So that at the end, it makes sense.
Right.
I'm
Mhm.
trying to think what I could mention without, I fear, giving away too much, because to me, um, some of the
Well, well,
ideas.
we can use a classic example of the Sixth Sense, I think it is the one where Bruce Willis is dead for he doesn't
Yeah.
realize he's dead, and you think the way M. Night Shyamalan sets it up, you don't really pay attention to the fact that there are all these little clues that he's dead the whole time, and that the conversations that he's having with the little boy it's because the boy knows that he's dead, but he has this trepidation in the beginning. It's not because he's a therapist, it's because he's dead, and most of the dead people he sees want something from him instead of wanting to help him. That's the flip.
That is actually a great example of the other point I made too. There I was watching the movie,
Uh-huh.
and there comes a point, I can't remember it exactly, and oh, your listeners are going to catch me on the exact details, but there comes a point when, the boy's mother says, something happens, and you would think normally she'd say, I'm going to go call your therapist, who is allegedly Bruce Willis. And
Right.
instead she says, I'm going to go call the school or the parent. And I
Right.
was thinking, wouldn't she normally call the therapist? But
Right.
I didn't focus on that because I was caught up in the plot. And of
Right.
course, that was a clue
Right.
because there is no therapist. Bruce Willis is dead. He is not actually the kid's therapist, but he has been presented to us as the kid's therapist. And he
Right.
was when he was alive.
Right.
So that is exactly the kind of thing that I'm hoping that readers will, take back. I mean, I would say, like, if you have anybody who reads the book and thinks they found one of those planted clues, if that's okay, they could contact you and then you could contact me and I'd be happy to confirm that it was, or to say, oh my gosh, I never realized. But I don't want to
Yeah.
give away,
Right.
things now. But
Yeah.
but exactly that. It's so that at the end, the reader says, yes, of course,
Right. Of
but not in
course.
the middle. You don't want
Yeah,
the reader saying that in the
right.
middle.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah,
You don't want him to get it too early. You don't want him to
exactly.
get the Yeah, right. Oh, yeah. So I have that on my to be read list. I haven't got there yet. But so hopefully I'll contact you and say, "Oh, yes."
Well, thank you for putting it on your list and
Yeah, right.
recommending it. This is the point where you should say, what's the name of the book on your list? Oh, the
That's
name of
right.
the book and the author are, now you get to
Yes.
say those.
Oh,
It's
no, you say it. You say it.
oh, okay. So thank you for putting my book, I Meant to Tell You by Fran Hawthorne on your TBR list. Okay, thank you. Oh, I always get so caught up in these conversations with you that I forget I'm supposed to be mentioning my
promote
book
your book.
every
Yes, and
time.
I will have I don't do it on Patreon, but on Story Power, I always have show notes. So, and with links so people can go buy your book. Yeah,
Thank you. Thank you. Wonderful.
I always do that. Yeah, so so that was an award winner for you. Now you're working on a couple of other books. Are they similar to I Meant to Tell You, or are they sequels, or are they totally different?
Okay. They're not sequels. I mean, I guess I have my style. In that sense, you could say that they're sort of similar, but they're not. First of all, to talk about sequel for a second, the way I Meant to Tell You came about, and I may have mentioned this in the earlier Story Power, but I will be brief in that case. Um, I had this plan for this big 4-generation family saga, which is
Oh,
going to start in the present
oh, that's
and go backwards to unravel the the truth behind the stories that the family had been told.
mhm, mhm.
Um, and I started writing it, and it was getting 500 pages. I don't know, it was getting unwieldy. And the research was freaking me out because I was going to have to research 4 different eras,
Mhm.
in 3 different locations, details of clothing and food and lifestyle. But I had mapped it out. And I even rough drafted the whole thing. And I knew these characters and I knew their stories. And so basically my agent at the time, she said, Fran, this is just too much. Why don't you just take the 2 newest generations?
Mhm.
I said, oh, those are what became I Meant to Tell You.
Mm.
Miranda and Russ and Miranda's parents, Judith and Jerry, essentially. And but meanwhile, you see, I knew the grandparents and great grandparents really well because I had mapped out their life stories, their personalities. I'd started writing some of those chapters. So that made it so much easier for me to write this book because I knew the background. I
Mhm.
knew why Judith acted in certain ways because her parents were certain ways, even
Mhm.
if there's very little of her parents in the book. It did help me a little bit in some scenes. I could, it's just like how much better you know a person if you know their grandparents. It's just a
Mhm.
whole extra depth that you have.
Mhm.
So anyway, part of me says maybe someday I'll write those first 2 generations as a prequel to this one.
I love that.
Yeah, but meanwhile, I have 2 other books that I'm writing, so it has to get in my TBW list to be written. Oh man, we writers have so many TBW lists. Oh,
Yes, right.
so I do write my 2 novels so far, and the next 2 are focused on relationships within families and with friends. With there's a woman who's at the center who um, is a mom and a daughter, and a wife or not, or was a wife,
Mhm.
has friends and or siblings, middle class, professional. I always set them in different locations though. My first novel, The Heirs, was set mostly in a fictitious town I created in New Jersey.
Mhm.
I Meant to Tell You is set mostly in Washington, D.C., but
Mhm.
also in New York,
Mhm.
in Brooklyn. The next 2, and I'm not giving titles, one is set in California, mostly in Santa Barbara and Los Angeles,
Mhm.
and the other is set up in Albany, New York. These are all places I've either lived in or worked in or have some visited a lot, so I know something about them.
Mhm. Mhm.
Or in the case of Albany, I have relatives I've visited a lot, but also I've just done a lot of research on New York State history and politics because I volunteer at a historical museum. Uh, anyway, so they're definitely set in different places. I mean, they're pretty much, yeah, late 20th, early 21st century. So, but then
Mhm.
there's some flashbacks for sure.
Mhm.
Um, I mean, in I Meant to Tell You, there's a number of chapters set in the 60s during
Mhm.
the anti-war protests, the assassination of Bobby Kennedy, um, the Grape Worker strike, the takeover at Columbia University,
Mhm.
where Judith and Jerry are being active,
Mhm.
for instance. And then Judith has to go home to her parents' apartment in Brooklyn, and it's a world away from what
Mhm.
she's been in. Anyway, so those are some, Um, I always write in what's called close third person. I get deeply, deeply into the mind of a main character, but never first person. Um, and I don't like first person because there are no boundaries. If
Mm.
I'm writing first person, I should know everything about me, and I want some boundaries.
Mhm.
I want to make it harder for the reader. Oops, I
Mhm.
shouldn't say that. By not by having only one person's point of view, but you don't get everything. And I also think it also makes the reader work a little harder. Now I'm going to
Mhm.
lose even more readers, but I like the challenge of being a reader. If you have multiple points of view, then you know what many, many people think.
Mhm.
And if you have just the one point of view, you see everything through that person's eyes. And
Right.
you, as a reader, have to keep making judgments as to whether to trust that person because um,
Right.
you do have some other sources of information.
Right.
What other people say to the main character, for example.
Mhm.
If
Mhm.
they say, "What? You're crazy. You're doing it again."
Right.
Or the actions, or if it takes place in a city that you know, or in a period of time that you were alive and
Mhm.
you know,
Mhm. Mhm.
basically, this isn't true. And I like to make it hard on myself too.
Well, no, I like books that I have to work to understand or yeah, I am not one of those that likes one of those fluffy cozy mysteries or fluffy romance. I don't read romance very often, but when I do read those cozy mystery things, if I'm in a place where I just want to read and I've just finished a really heavy book or something and I want something really light, at the end I'm really not very satisfied. I want something that's going to make me work and I will be satisfied at the end of the book or the series.
Mm. Okay, good. I'm glad. Yeah, I mean, on the other hand, I don't know anybody who's really enjoyed reading, James Joyce. That's what that people do enjoy, it, but it's hard, and I'm not
Mhm.
that. Finnegan's Wake. I mean, I didn't even get very far in that. So I don't
Oh,
want to make it that hard.
oh
Um,
right, yeah. I have
yeah,
not read any James Joyce. For some reason I didn't have to read it and I was reading, I was doing theater and religious studies, so I wasn't reading James Joyce. I was reading plays and, stuff. Shakespeare could be we could equate Shakespeare to that because most people don't want to read Shakespeare. But when you read them and hear them and see them performed, sometimes you're laughing out loud and there's lots of body language and stuff like that.
say,
Like
why did I think it was so hard? Yeah,
right.
I mean,
Uh-huh.
because there is the language barrier. Shakespearean English is not modern English.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Although you can mostly figure out what it's called. It's not
Right.
that different.
Yeah. So
You know,
I don't know anything about James Joyce and so I can't really speak to whether or not I would like it or not. I've never even
yeah,
tried to
okay.
read it.
He's same. I mean, early Joyce is reads like anybody else. The Dubliners, his short stories, and then it gets progressively more and more obscure, deliberately so.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
And if you had 100 years, you could go through and pick apart, the sentences and the wordplay and the meanings, and then with the help of some research volumes. Um, and so I'm just saying I'm not trying to make it that hard on my readers.
Right.
But
Right.
yeah, I want also my books to have not just a plot, but something deeper, like I said, and I meant to tell you, it's a question of should we be out there trying to make the world better in some way?
Mhm.
And your
Mhm.
definition of making it better may be different than my definition. So I
Mhm.
may inspire readers to do things that right, no, I wish you hadn't done that, but anyway,
Yeah, right.
I without, sort of saying too much. Well, The Air is my first novel. How does it seem? What a different kind of responsibility. It was basically the story of two families. There was the Polish Jewish family who most of whom had been killed in the Holocaust, but the
Mhm.
mother had survived, and they were now living in this fictitious town in New Jersey. And then the son or grandson becomes friends with a little boy whose family is also from Poland, and they're Catholic. And they lived there through the war. The parents only emigrated to the US, 10, 15 years earlier. And the Jewish mother of the little boy, she can't stop thinking when she looks at the other family, what did your parents do to my parents, my grandparents in what role did your family play in the war? Because the Poland has a long history of anti-Semitism way before Hitler ever invaded.
Mhm.
Uh, and it's funny, I hesitate to say that because every time I post anything on Twitter, I get hounded by these Polish Holocaust denying trolls who just,
Mhm.
come up with
Mhm.
all sorts of nasty things. So I'm stepping into tough water here. But my point in that book was to talk about how many generations down does the responsibility carry? Well, it's not fair to blame little grandchildren
Right.
who were certainly not born then. Um, okay, nor their parents who weren't born or who were just kids. But at what point does the young generation have responsibility to challenge
Mhm.
what they may have inherited, what they may have heard from older
Mhm.
generations?
Right. Yeah, and also, like, we'll use Ireland as an example. You know, at some point they decided to have Northern Ireland and Ireland. I think Northern Ireland is part of England. I can't remember
Right.
which
Yeah.
way it is.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, and then Ireland is its own. It's not part of England. It's its own government. And I read someplace recently that the two are talking to each other. It's like, well, we have this heritage on this island. It doesn't really matter so much about the religion. And so it's like at some point they decided we need to forgive each other for what happened, for all the things that happened. Now, that takes a long time sometimes.
Yes. Yes. And unfortunately, there are too many conflicts in the world without getting into politics and everything. I mean, you wonder how would some cases how are they going to live side by side? Some
Mhm.
cases they won't. I mean, I don't
Mhm.
think I'm stepping into anything really dangerous here if I were to say that, you know, let's hope that someday Russia will get out of Ukraine.
Right.
And you know what? They don't really have to live side by side. I mean, they geographically they are, but
Mhm.
Russia's a
Mhm.
big country and its population centers are not right on the border, and
Right.
they can go, um, live separate lives. Although the populations even then, that's not as easy as I thought because the populations were very intertwined. There are many
Yes.
families with members living in both countries and
Right.
people in Ukraine were all fluent in Russian and so
Right.
even then it's caused a lot of division among families. So even that would seem to be one of the easiest. And now I look at it again and I go, no, it's not so easy. Yeah,
Yeah.
cut that
Well,
out
it's
from
it's like
our
it's like
conversation.
the American Civil War, we're still struggling
Well, yeah, but not so much for families divided. But yes, we are.
with the ramifications of what happened.
Yeah. So,
Yeah. So, okay, we only have about 10 minutes left. Do you have anything you want to say or books to recommend or that
ah,
you've been reading?
oh man, yeah. Let me think about some of the ones that I've really enjoyed. Well, okay. Speaking of sort of Holocaust, like my first novel
Mhm.
being based on the Holocaust, I just read a novel called The Lost Shtetl by Max Gross, and it
Ooh.
starts out with what seems like a charming setup that one little village deep in a forest in Poland, somehow nobody knew it existed. And it went through the last like 200 years and just it's a little Jewish village in their old fashioned Jewish ways. The Nazis never invaded, but also the communists, the modernity, it's just like
Mhm.
they were
Mhm.
living. and it gets discovered. So it seems like a sort of Brigadoon kind of charming setup.
Mhm, mhm.
But where it goes with that is much deeper and very fascinating. And I also read a novel called Gratitude. I read it in French, so the English translation is Gratitude, I think, by Delphine de Vigan. And it is amazing in the way it's very short. That's what makes it easier to read in a foreign language if it's short, right? Anyway,
I
but
can't read anything in a foreign language, so
yeah, well, and with just a few words, she just says so much in between the lines, and
Mm,
I'm just I'm so I love that kind of writing. I mean,
mhm.
I'm not her style, but I don't write in her style. It's really stark. But I do try in my writing also to you know, well, the classic, show don't tell, which people say is a cliche, and I say no, it's the best way to write.
Mhm,
Um, it
mhm,
really, I try not to explain, as I was saying earlier. I try to have my readers have to dig a little, but I'm
mhm,
not going to mislead the readers. I'm not going to
mhm.
plant fake clues.
Right,
Um, I'm nothing. You're never gonna. It's not going to end. Oh, it was all a dream. No, no, no. Oh,
right.
she had amnesia. No, that's cheating. Um, you know, uh, it's going to be, I hope, inherent in my characters' personalities and their families and their past. What happens, but I do try, yeah, to hint, to put clues, as I said, and not to come right
Mhm,
out and say
mhm,
she was angry. Oh,
mhm,
no, no, no. It should be clear in her words, in her actions,
mhm,
uh,
mhm.
or maybe the reader is going to look at her and say, "Aren't you angry? I would be furious," and maybe I'll delay her anger to get the
Mhm.
reader to put herself in that person's shoes. I mean, it's a lot of ways to go about saying things without outright saying them, and that is the
Right.
kind of writing style I
Yeah.
try to do, and I really appreciate.
Yeah. Well, you've had lots of practice because weren't you a journalist at one point? You've
Yes,
had
I was
lots
most of
of
my career,
practice. Yeah,
and
writing.
that's so different. Actually, I had to unlearn. Okay, it helped me with my research skills. I mean,
Mhm, mhm,
I did so much research for all my novels.
mhm, mhm.
Stupid things. I mean, went to Ellis Island not to look up my
Mm.
ancestry, but to describe the chandeliers on the walls.
Right.
But
Oh, yeah, I
anyway,
remember you talking about that, yeah.
but the problem with journalism is that it's just the facts, which is good.
Right.
Now that part's good. You're right. That is similar to the way I try to write,
Mhm,
but it's too short, too curt.
mhm,
And I had to learn not to rush to the action. Step
mhm,
back. Sometimes you have to plant the seed.
mhm,
Sometimes you have to describe the people. Readers want to know what people look like, not every single detail. And I had to unlearn the short, you know, um, style of journalism. Of course, there's longer journalism too, and I've written that.
mhm.
Um, but I'm just saying, the basics. You don't say the five W's in your first paragraph of your novel. When nor
Right,
why. No, no, no.
right.
Right.
Yeah.
In classic journalism, the unimportant stuff is at the bottom. Well, that's not how a book ends. You don't end with the
Right.
unimportant stuff, right?
Right, exactly.
Oh, this is getting boring, so I'll just stop now. No, no, no.
That's so
But
true.
I hope it's been good training for me, all my years of nonfiction writing and journalism.
Yes. Well, I think, I've been keeping a blog since 2013 and it has helped. It has
Uh-huh.
helped my writing. But I think I use descriptions better now and metaphors and similes and mostly metaphors. But or analogies, better than when I first started. And to try to get even in my blog sometimes when I'm describing a book or a television show that I have read or seen, I try to describe how I felt about it, how it made me feel, which is part of getting into writing a novel. You've got to show how your characters feel about things,
You know what
so
else? I mean, 'cause I don't keep a blog or a diary, although I might start a newsletter. But writing emails, this may sound crazy, but writing emails can be great practice for fiction because there is a
Mm.
human being, at least
Mhm.
one,
Mhm.
who's going to read your email.
Mhm.
And not every email. I mean, only certain
Right.
emails are good practice. Think about how that person is going to read your words.
Mhm.
Because, no facial expressions, no tone of voice. It's just your words, like a
Right.
book.
Right.
How are your words going to come across?
Right.
What's the personality of the person reading? And
Mhm.
if you start doing that a little bit, you go crazy and never finish your email. But also, you start thinking about how to say what you want to say in your book. How
Mhm.
are readers going to take it? How
Mhm.
would a character in your book write a letter or an email
Mhm.
or say
Mhm.
something?
Mhm.
And so while I know we writers should not be spending so much time on social media or emails, we should be spending more time on our books. I think that any writing, almost any writing, can be good
Mhm.
practice. And
Right.
we need variety too. One of the books I'm working on, um, I had to have to put it aside for a couple days now. I have other things I need to do, but besides, I
Mhm.
need to vary my writing.
Mhm. Mhm. Oh, Fran, we only have a couple minutes left. Thank you so much. If you've got something else you want to say,
Oh, I feel like I should have been talking more about my book. I get you have you're such a good person to talk with that we get off on these other tangents, which makes it fun. Um,
but I remember you did not want to tell too much about your book when we talked earlier because,
oh,
you don't want to give too many clues away. So,
well, yeah, I mean, I do. I don't, well, I don't want to give away clues, but I certainly want to talk about it in the sense of saying, well, okay, the funny things that inspire me.
mhm,
You know,
yeah.
uh,
Well,
for example, okay, here's one real quick. There's a thing to show what a stickler Russ is for following the law. I
uh-huh.
remembered a time when my son was newborn and we bought a package of cookies in the store and it had a worm in it. And we wrote to Nabisco, and they sent us a big carton full of all kinds of cookies and crackers. And that's the kind of thing Russ does. He won't
Uh-huh.
let the company get away with putting a worm in their package.
Oh,
So I'm just saying
yeah.
the kinds of things that come out from your past,
Right.
um, you just never
Yes.
finish.
Yes. I love that. I love that story. That's
All
so
right, it's
great.
on chapter, what is it? Chapter 3, I believe. Anyway, so there you go.
Oh, great. Well, thank you so much for being my guest again.
Thank you so much for inviting me again, and good luck to you in your writing.
Oh, thank you. I hope you enjoyed the show. If you like what you heard, please share it with a friend and give us a rating and or review on your favorite podcast app. It will help people find us. I invite you to join my Patreon community at patreon.com/storypower, all one word. Or if you like, you can subscribe to Story Power on Apple Podcasts. It's my aim to build a community where we discuss the stories we love and talk about what we learned from them. I offer extra audio content and story suggestions to my patrons on both platforms. Remember, as Philip Pullman said, after nourishment, shelter, and companionship, stories are the thing we need most in the world. Let's spread the story love. Until next time, this is Lucinda Sage-Midgorden. Thanks for listening.